I had symptoms since I was a child, and chronic anxiety was a big one for me. So this feeling of dread and of worry and concern that bad things were going to happen. And I can look back really a long way since I was, 4, 5, 6 years old, and remember thinking that bad things could happen, that there was no real reason to think that. And that continued into being a teenager and an adult. And so I came to think of anxiety as something that I would just have to live with. My name's Ali Houston, and I'm originally from Glasgow in Scotland, which is why I sound like Shrek. But I now live in Liverpool and spend a bit of time in Oxford as well, where I'm leading a study using ketogenic diet to see how it affects ADHD and depression symptoms, which is my story in a randomized controlled trial form, where I used to be a physicist with terrible mental health, ADHD symptoms, chronic anxiety, and seasonal depression. And when I switched to a ketogenic diet of a specific type in March 2016, my mental health symptoms went away and they've not come back.
Mental health is such a kind of big topic at the moment. It seems to be in the press, and like social media is there's lots of kind of mentions of mental health issues. Is it is it in your opinion true to say that we are in a mental health crisis? What do you think of the climate of mental health at the moment?
I think that's fair to say we're in a mental health crisis. There's a big debate about whether the rate of diagnosis for various mental health conditions increasing is because of a real increase in underlying rates or because of an increase in awareness and self-advocacy so that people want to get diagnosed and that they might be able to, you know, get some kind of help. Which of course everybody wants some sort of help
Mm.
of some form in life, whether it's a cup of coffee to jolt you up in the morning
Mhm.
or just some support, someone to talk to. So I think there's an incentive to be diagnosed with something, but then I think if our hypothesis is right, that there's a metabolic underpinning for mental disorder symptoms, then you just have to look at the statistics behind how our metabolic health is. And it doesn't matter where you look, they're not good. So a study a few years ago showed that around 88 or 90-ish% of Americans were metabolically unhealthy in some way. And so that's the if there is if metabolism, the way we make energy in the body, is at least partly responsible for how we feel mentally, then we're not doing very well as a worldwide population, and that I therefore think that the so-called mental health crisis is reasonably named and is real and is not just an artifact of more awareness and therefore this incentive to get a diagnosis to get help.
Okay. Your own kind of mental health journey. What you know, what issues did you have that you've managed to kind of remedy or control now?
Yeah, I had symptoms since I was a child, and chronic anxiety was a big one for me. So this feeling of dread and of worry and concern that bad things were going to happen. And I can look back really a long way since I was, 4, 5, 6 years old, and remember thinking that bad things could happen, that, that there was no real reason to think that. And that continued into being a teenager and an adult. And so I came to think of anxiety as something that I would just have to live with. And it was sometimes really, really bad. I tried various things to get rid of it. One of them was meditation. I was imagining my anxiety as like a fish swimming up to me that I could pick up and look at that I didn't want anymore. So I would just let it back in the stream to float away.
Mm.
And the feelings and thoughts that I did want, I would keep. But of course, that's very tiring to have to do all the time. I
Mm.
was thinking, I thought that really that this anxiety was just going to stick with me, that it was in me, that it was part of me. I was just going to have to deal with it in this way, even if I could identify these red herrings,
Mm.
and try to consciously let them go. Similarly with ADHD symptoms, I was, you should see my report cards from when I was a kid. It was like, if only Ali could focus, if only this, if only that. And, I was definitely not the model student, always talking to people, always distracted. But it wasn't just this sort of sense that, the debate around ADHD, is it just sort of medicalizing a natural state of a child?
Mm.
It went beyond that. And because I was sociable, I was chatty, I was active, but it really was that I struggled to put my focus in particular places. Even if I wanted to, I would get distracted and not be able to complete tasks. And it was a real problem.
Mm.
And similarly, my mood really had ups and downs. So it got worse as I got older, where it was very noticeable in the winter that I would have a kind of seasonal affective disorder type set of
Mm.
symptoms. And that got, very pronounced into my late 20s, where in the winter I just knew I was not going to feel good for months and months. And so it got to the stage where I was studying in 2015 for a physics PhD, because I'd got a physics degree, I'd been working in industry, I started a physics PhD, and I was completely underperforming, and my symptoms were terrible. I couldn't decide where I put my focus. I was getting distracted. I was getting really bad seasonal depression. My anxiety was off the charts. I went for an ADHD diagnosis and got it, and was given Ritalin. And I thought, okay, great. The diagnosis makes sense of a lot of my past. I very much bought into just sort of, the medical paradigm of identifying these symptoms. This is modern science. We have modern tools to apply. Ritalin does help to some extent with my focus, and it made me feel like, okay, I'm onto something here. But I needed to take more and more as the effects wore off. I built up a tolerance to the drug, apparently. It also made me emotionally quite cold, and it made my anxiety worse. And it did nothing for my seasonal depression. So after some months on it, I started to feel really disillusioned with it, and that this was not going to be super helpful. Now, around that time, one of my professors had, recovered a few years before from ME, chronic fatigue syndrome, where he'd been told he wouldn't work again. He was in his early 40s. He couldn't walk for more than 50 yards without collapsing. He was bedridden, and the doctors didn't know what to do. He'd found out about Gary Taubes and read Good Calories, Bad Calories, and along with some supplementation based on the work of some functional doctors in the ME, chronic fatigue syndrome space, he tried a ketogenic diet, and within 6 months he was running 10Ks again.
Mm.
So he came back to work as a physics professor. Fast forward a few years when I came in, and he was saying all this stuff like 5 a day was invented by marketers, or nobody should be eating wheat, or margarine isn't food. And I was like, well, show your sources, man. This is wild. And he did. And he always was able to. And so I went down a bit of a rabbit hole and thought, well, keto seems like an interesting thing. and decided I would try it.
Mm.
And that was March 2016. I started. I thought at around that time I was struggling to control my weight as well, which was really getting to me.
Mm.
And actually, between my heaviest and my lightest was like 50 pounds,
Mm.
it's 4
Mm.
stone or something,
Yeah.
significant. And I went on this ketogenic diet in March 2016, and I was immediately able to see how my weight was under control. But to my great surprise, my symptoms, anxiety and ADHD symptoms, just went away.
Mm.
I could control where I put my focus. I um, didn't have anxiety anymore.
Mm.
And then that winter, when I thought, oh, well, this has been nice, but here comes the slow freight train of seasonal depression,
Yeah.
it just didn't arrive. And it hasn't come back since. So that's what's happened with my symptoms over the years.
Mm. That's brilliant. That's brilliant. I've got a friend of mine. I hadn't seen him for a couple of weeks, and he is a truck driver. He is wanting to get to become an electrician. So he's forked out. I think it's about a grand or so for this electrician course. But he got diagnosed with ADHD in his 40s. Um, and he was given medication. I'm not sure exactly what medication it is, um, but he struggled with his concentration and struggled with his focus to the point where he's like, I've invested this much money in this course, I can't then be taking this medication at the same time. That's just going to kind of completely throw him off. So I kind of introduced him to kind of a meat-based way of eating, and since then he's kind of been off that, and he was kind of he was glowing yesterday when I saw him anyway. So I'm hoping that he's kind of going in the right direction. Um, but yeah, the what I wanted to ask you, link to that, is what label do you put on how you eat? Would you call yourself carnivore, paleo, um, ketovore? What is the label that you put on yourself? Because it can get quite confusing for people.
Yeah, definitely. People talk about one of my big issues with the scientific literature around obesity is that they always talk about the high fat diet
Mm.
as if there's one high fat diet, which
Mm.
is ridiculous. You talk about high fat diets in mice or in humans, and the difference in the response of an animal if you give it like lots of one type of fat is completely different to if you give it another. And
Mm.
so this is similar in this space. I think it's important to define what you mean, but even within these definitions, there's an infinity of possibilities.
Mm.
So I tend to just say that I'm on a ketogenic diet. And then if people want to know the details, I'll give them to them because I've been through various kind of forms of it and tried different versions. And I think, I love that old Heraclitus quote where a person can try to jump in the same river twice, but they're not the same person and it's not the same river. And so what someone needs might change over time. In fact, it's almost certainly going to change. And I think, one of my favorite studies, even though it was small and relatively poorly conducted, mainly because it was done nearly 100 years ago, as a study by Clara Davis, where she got children, young children, babies really, so that they weren't affected by food culture yet, to choose their own way of eating. Whole foods were presented in front of them, and the nurse that was giving them the foods wasn't allowed to try affect what the kids wanted. The kids just pointed, the nurse would feed, and all these kids had different deficiency illnesses, and so they all ate different things, but without fail they healed their own deficiency illnesses by eating, and then stopped eating the foods that they really needed to cover those deficiency illnesses and moved on to eating other things. So I think we can build that intuition in ourselves to the point where we know what's good for us and we eat that. And so I just say ketogenic diet, and I can sort of describe what I'm eating a lot of these days, but I don't stick rigidly to carnivore. And I've got a few reasons for that. But when I've felt good sometimes and not good at other times, depending on how that carnivore diet is composed and me at the time. Mm-hmm. So, for example, I did an experiment in October 2022 and October 2023, which I called Mctober. Mm. And all I ate was the McDonald's burger patties and the condiments, so the little onions and a bit of the mustard and ketchup. Mm. And I would get 9, 12, 15, whatever of the little thin patties and take them home and cook up some egg yolks in beef dripping, beef tallow, and maybe a little bit of spice and seasoning. And that's all I ate for the whole month. And I felt incredible. Never felt better. And people were saying, oh, but it's horrible beef and it's got additives and seed oils and that none of that's true, actually. It's all just British and Irish beef, salt and pepper, and okay, the condiments can be suboptimal, but then, that made it palatable to me. I felt amazing. And but I heard what they were saying. Why don't you just eat organic, grass-raised, pasture for life beef and lamb? So I did. I got the best I could find, and I do think they're brilliant. A place called Pelham Farm in the Scottish borders, and just ate that. The plan was to just eat that for a month. Super fatty. It probably would have been around 30% fat mince, ground beef. And so over 1-to-1 fat to protein ratio by weight, easily, edging towards the 2-to-1. And after 2 weeks, I had to stop because I felt terrible. My word recall was going. I didn't feel good. And I thought, well, what's the difference? I thought there's a few differences there. Histamine in the Pelham Farm stuff, because it was sort of lots of mince and ground meat. And with the McDonald's patties, they'll be minced in a central location, frozen, and then transported until they're cooked. I would say that the eggs were probably the main difference. And so I thought, well, what could it have been in the eggs that made such a difference? I thought, well, maybe choline. Choline's a big deal in your brain functioning. And so I took a choline supplement called Alpha GPC, and within 90 minutes, my word recall had massively improved. So I abandoned the experiment because I did not feel good. A lot of people saying just beef, salt, and water, and I'm like, well, actually, I felt terrible, and I'm not going to stay on that. And all I wanted to eat for the next week was seafood and eggs. Okay. And so that's what I did, and I felt great. So now I include lots of things in my diet. My favourite meals are beef short ribs, which I do sort of on the smoker for a couple hours and then put in the oven low and slow. And I usually serve that with a beef jus. So mainly made from beef bones, the sauce, but it also has stuff like, carrots and onions and garlic and bay leaf and stuff in small amounts, just for flavour. And, I could eat that every day, I'm sure of it. But I also have lots of eggs, lots of fish, lots of shellfish. Sometimes I have vegetables, not very much, to be honest, but occasionally, just because I like the taste and I don't notice a massive difference. So there's an infinity of diets, even in what I've done in the past. So I just usually stick to saying keto.
Okay. I mean, as you were talking there, I was thinking, is it a case that the best diet for you is kind of ketogenic, so it's kind of more fattier, but then linked to that is like an intuitive approach. And then I thought to myself, like, how do you teach an intuitive approach? How do you um people just make instant choices based on what they see in the shop, so they're removed from that intuition, they're removed from that awareness. And then I thought, like, this is all going off in my head at the same time as you're talking, is potentially could the fact that you have ADHD mean that you're more kind of tuned in to make these almost creative food choices. Um, and then again, what was going through my head is, Judy Cho, Nutrition with
Yes.
Judy. So I picked up a phrase from her where she talks about eating the rainbow of meat. Um, so potentially eating the rainbow of meats could mean that you are kind of limiting potential um, negative aspects of just eating beef, salt, and water. If you are also incorporating shellfish, eggs, lamb, chicken, but yeah, sorry, this was all going off in my head as you were talking, but I don't know what you think of all of that. Sorry, that's quite a lot, but
Yeah, no, I love that, the rainbow of meat. Um, because you get told to eat the rainbow because of antioxidants and stuff, all the different fruit and veg, and I don't think that really holds up to what we know about the science.
Mm,
And so yeah, eating the rainbow of meats, I think if you combine all of these things, then you don't find yourself short on anything.
mm,
If you have rare steak, everyone knows, people have known for hundreds of years, sailors knew that fresh meat staved off scurvy, and that if you're eating less sugar, then you don't need so much vitamin C.
mm,
And I haven't seen any long-term carnivores who have scurvy. I haven't seen any case reports of that.
mm,
And there's all that great stuff from Stefansson about going into the Arctic and surviving on meat in the experiment in back at the hospital in America.
mm,
And scurvy is not an issue, right? So if you're worried about vitamin C, then you can just have a gram or two of pure vitamin C a day anyway.
mm,
So I don't know of anything that's truly missing from that eating the rainbow of meats approach.
mhm,
And I think the ADHD question is or thought around creativity is something that I think about too. ADHD cluster symptoms are sometimes thought of purely as a pathology, right? It's
mm,
something that has gone wrong. But then there's a debate around um, why has that happened? Some people say it's neurodevelopmental
mm,
purely. So if you're taking that stance, it would mean that it's something that happened during your development, whether that's because of your genes or your environment, but that it's set in stone now and that's it.
mm,
Some people say that it's purely metabolic, so that there's no developmental aspect to it. The symptoms around it are just because of something in your environment that you can change.
mm,
And then there's kind of a split view, I suppose, which is where I would. There's actually another extreme view where, you might say that there's no pathology whatsoever,
mm,
that I'm just neurospicy, and
mm,
that this is part of me. It's the world that's wrong,
mm,
and there's everything's fine with me. It's just the world that's wrong. If only the world was different, then you wouldn't see a pathology.
mm,
Now, I tend to think that it's actually a combination of neurodevelopmental, um, but mainly environmental, and also a bit of a mismatch with the environment
mm,
in terms of calling something a pathology when it isn't necessarily. And that we evolved over millions of years into who we are now, and that you can imagine traits associated with ADHD, like creativity,
mm,
like seeking novelty,
mm,
like enjoying multiple projects at once,
mm,
would be assets in a hunter-gatherer environment. And that if you put that person into a confined space like primary school and
Yeah.
ask them to sit still, look straight ahead, and not talk, then it's just not going to happen, right?
Mm.
So that part of it, I think, can be rubbing up against modern society in a way that is just going to pathologize something which there's no need for.
Mm.
But I also felt that those symptoms of not being able to choose where I put my focus and the mood symptoms associated with ADHD, and they've gone away.
Mm.
So I still feel creative. I still want to have multiple projects on at once, and I still enjoy new things, maybe more than the average person.
Mhm.
But I think there may be a neurodevelopmental aspect to it, so that something could have happened during my developmental phases that left me with something that I needed to be more extreme about my environment further down the line to mitigate. But that is quite difficult to tease out from the data.
Mm.
I just think that those positive traits I'm very happy that I still have,
Yeah.
except now I can choose where I put my focus. And so, yeah, I think you're right that someone who has ADHD, although they might find it difficult at the start without a bit of support, that they can be more creative and get more into it and actually fly solo. They often find themselves being lone wolf type characters
Mm.
in
Mhm.
lots of different ways. So I think I hope that it's uniquely suited to studying that sort of thing and that people won't drop off. I think some people are worried that with the study that we're doing, that we'll recruit 50 people to do a ketogenic diet and that they just won't be able to concentrate and it'll be like herding cats. But I think they are more motivated than that, and they are creative and um, get excited about new projects.
Mm.
So we shall see. But I've been kind of ADHD-esque in that answer, in that I've taken what you've said,
Mm.
opened multiple tabs, and then
Yeah.
thrown a kind of thought salad at you.
Oh no, that I mean, I think that's how I think. Maybe I need to. Well, I was gonna say maybe I need to get diagnosed, but I'm happy. I'm happy. I don't, I'm happy with the creative thinking and kind of just rolling off. But it reminds. So my background is, or my love, my passion is fitness. And there's a term that I came across some years back called evolutionary mismatch in regard to how our bodies are not performing as they should do in the world that we're in now. Um, and it links very much to the ADHD thing. Like somebody with ADHD, back in hunter gatherer times, they had a role, in the tribe. The way in which they thought of the world and the way in which they saw things was of value. But yeah, potentially now the way in which the world is set up, it doesn't recognize that value. But yeah, that's fascinating stuff. With regard to the mental health issues that you've had, are you controlling them solely through food now, or are you also having medication, also supplementing? What's the way that you manage it?
I don't have any medication. I got disillusioned with that and stopped taking that. And I can't remember now. I've got a note of it somewhere, but I think it was. I think I kept taking it until after I started the diet, and then realized that my symptoms were clearing up. Um, yeah, so no medication. Although I am at the moment drinking cups of tea, so you may say that I'm controlling that my focus to some extent with caffeine, which would be fair enough. And I go through bouts of quitting. I love that Mark Twain quote: "Quitting smoking's easy. I've done it thousands of times." And it's the same with caffeine and um, supplements. I've been sort of up and down and all around with that. I think particularly in the ME chronic fatigue syndrome community, where I kind of dived into a lot of what works and doesn't work and works for some people and not for others. Some people want to be more natural, quote unquote, and they shun everything to do with pharmaceutical companies and then move straight onto a sort of alternative pharmaceutical world, which is kind of what supplements are. And if it's not naturally in the body anyway, then it's not a supplement, it's a drug. And a lot of supplements get called supplements and they're actually drugs. Plus, if you're shoveling in large quantities of a particular supplement, even if it is truly a supplement, and your processes in your body are able to use that, then they're going to use other cofactors that go along with that. So very often people get told rightly that if they have one supplement, every day or regularly, they're going to need to take another one or two or three or more to cover how those supplements are used in the body. And then, so before they know it, they're like the old lady who swallowed the fly, and they've got this apothecary's cabinet full of expensive supplements. They're not even sure whether they're doing anything anymore. And so the other thing is that sometimes people say, buying supplements is just having expensive pee, which I do not agree with. Sometimes supplements can be actually too powerful. And I've worked with clients who have been told that for their mental health symptoms, they should be having large doses of B vitamins, and that actually they end up in the hospital with hypomania or mania. And that, so I think that they need to be approached with caution, not just because that they can cause big problems, but because it's really, really, I think, impossible to stay on top of regulating the exact amount that you should be taking of which supplement. And there isn't actually a test out there that can tell you which ones to take for sure. There's sort of nutrigenomics stuff, which is interesting, and it's maybe like a good arrow in the ground of where to sort of maybe look. But I think de-emphasizing supplements is really what I'm all about. And so control of my symptoms now is mainly around food, and exercise definitely helps for me too. Being active one way or another. I definitely feel much better if I'm standing at a standing desk at the moment. So that's always good for me to sort of be able to stand up for a lot of the day, moving around. So going for a walk at least once a day, going into nature feels good to me. I love the beach. I love the forest. I don't do it enough, frankly. And other exercise that I particularly like is lifting weights. And it just makes me feel calm, particularly calm and good for the rest of the day if I lift weights. And so, I got into it originally with a colleague, I think before I even started. No, it was around the time I started keto. And he was suggesting that barbell weights were the sort of best bang for your buck in terms of time used and return on investment. Because I was using, like the machines with the pulleys and everything, and like the smaller weights, and doing some HIIT classes as well. And although I think the sort of occasional burst of cardiovascular activity, like in a HIIT class, can be really good, and it does help to build up connective tissue and all the rest of it, and the smaller muscle groups, it's quite balanced. I think I do get the most bang for my buck from using barbell weights. And so I'd started with an app called Strong Lifts. And so it was 5x5. So it's really just like squat and deadlift. So I now just do a leg press because I think it's less technical, less likely to get injured. And then I do overhead press, vertical row, and bench press, just sort of alternately, and a couple of days a week. And that's all it takes to maintain that feeling. And if I don't do it, I still feel good. It's just that I feel better with that. So that's mainly it. And of course, being careful about who your connections are, who you spend time with, and how your sleep is. But I think sometimes the arrow of causality is difficult to understand there. Like, am I choosing to spend time with people who are particularly healthy mentally because I feel mentally healthy, or am I more mentally healthy because I've chosen to spend time with them? And there's no way to disentangle that. Similarly with exercise or sleep, there's some good interventional studies that show if you say to some sort of randomized controlled group, okay, do this type of exercise, and the other people don't do exercise, then exercise does help. But you also sometimes see like people's mood improves before their step count increases, and
Hmm.
that they actually feel like exercising because their metabolism is improved and their mood along with it.
Mm,
Similarly with sleep, you could say if you sort your sleep out, then your mental health will get better. But
mm,
then I think that's putting the cart before the horse a lot of the time, and that people's circadian rhythm is messed up partly because the metabolism is,
mm,
and the type of fat they're eating, the type of um, the state that their gut health is in.
mm.
That kind of once that's sorted, then the sleep falls into line,
Falls into,
and
yeah.
yeah, so that's how I feel about how I control my symptoms.
Yeah, I mean, so I've always been biased towards exercise. But recently it's more realizing that it's a completely holistic approach. You sort the exercise, you sort the food, as you said, stuff starts to fall in line. And it's kind of like a self-perpetuating thing. Um, and also going back to my background in like fitness, I used to be like really skinny when I was a kid. So I got the whole what's it called? Bigorexia, muscle dysmorphia. So you think you're really skinny, and then you eventually start to put on muscle, and you still think you're skinny. So I used to take all of the supplements, creatine, protein powders, GABA, Himby, like all of these kind of quirky um, uh, pills and powders that you would see in the bodybuilding magazines. And
Just
now,
one weird little tip will change everything.
yeah, exactly. And now that I'm in my 40s, I'm kind of borderline what you mentioned earlier about shunning everything, shunning supplements, shunning medication. And it feels like it's a personal mission to show people that you can be fit and healthy in your 40s and beyond without any supplementation, without any medication. But also in the back of my mind, I'm like, I hope that if ever I do need these supplements or do need these medications, I won't be stubborn enough to kind of, stick to the personal kind of the personal mission, and not jump on board and take these things. But for now, I say to people that I'm no pills, no powders, no potions. But yeah, that's me. What did I wanted to ask you? And so this another reason for this podcast is it feels like a way of giving friends and family advice, unsolicited advice, without in a very elaborate way of doing so. So, after I interview you, after I speak to you and I put the video together, I'll be sending the link off to friends and family that I know have ADHD and, depression and all of this. But I noticed in a couple of your interviews, you talk about unsolicited advice. What are your tips for trying to get through to people um, who you think need to deal with their diet?
Yeah, it's such an interesting um, area of human psychology, because when I felt so much better, I was suddenly evangelical,
Mm,
and I realized quickly how boring that is for people.
mm,
And part of it is if people could just touch my hand and understand how I felt, how
mm,
different I felt, then they would understand. But a feeling is experiential. You can only get so close to explaining a feeling. This is what poetry is. And the best poetry does it well, but it's still just a kind of imitation. And this is why when people get better, they have to use metaphors like the clouds parted and the sun shone through, or the like Ian Campbell says, it was like the national grid came on in my head for the first time in decades. So it can be heartbreaking, really, when even if you use these metaphors and try to explain to people that they just don't really believe that it could be as big as you think, and that probably on balance, you've joined a cult, and a hope, and they secretly hope that you don't get hurt, and that otherwise they wish you all the best. But leave me alone because I've got a doctor. So what are you doing? And so, and that's what I came to believe. That's what I came to understand. And then when I did some health coach training initially, I thought because it's a company which is really good, it's called Precure with a K, out in New Zealand. Louise Schofield and her husband Grant, and it's great. I thought because they are low carb advocates that they would basically be saying, okay, this is how you get people to do low carb. Couldn't be further from the truth. The psychology of humans changing their mind about things is fascinating. And I think leading an example is one thing, but honestly, not that many people in my family follow what I do in terms of doing it themselves. And I've changed careers from being a physicist to being a health coach and selling this type of food for a time. And now studying to do a PhD in Oxford, running a randomized controlled trial paid for by philanthropists, and lots of donors who believe that this can change people's lives. And yet, do people I know closely ask me about mental health stuff? Sometimes, but a lot of people wouldn't dream of it because I'm still just, someone who maybe got a bit better doing a keto thing, and they say they feel a lot better, but do they really? I mean, if it really worked, then doctors would know about it and they would tell me. And so the psychology of change is all about someone looking for a way to change. And so most people are in this pre-contemplation phase, which means they're not interested at all in making a change to their life, even if they have pain in some way. But they will come round at some point to contemplating. So at that point, they're thinking, okay, what am I going to do to try to get rid of this pain? And they're going to think about what level their pain is at, and then what level what level of effort it's going to require, and what level of payoff they think they're going to get for doing an intervention. And when they start looking around, they're going to see dozens of things, right? I mean, even before the internet algorithms, they would have found pamphlets or books or recommendations from friends or therapists or whatever, and then usually gone for one or two things and then sort of given it a go for a while. No different today, but they're being bombarded with choices. So when they think, okay, this is the intervention for me, and they give it a go, then they're in that sort of engagement phase. And what tends to happen, because most things don't work, is that they get disillusioned and then stop doing it and then enter that pre-contemplation phase again. And depending on who they are, that cycle might be 2 years, 5 years, longer. People go decades without doing anything really substantial. They just live with their pain, and it's tragic. And so I think the best, for me, the best use of my time is to try to just live the best example I can, and be vocal about really how it changed my life and how it can change others, and work very honestly to the limitations in this way of doing things. Epilepsy has used ketogenic diets for more than 100 years successfully. That's before, penicillin. And it works for a certain group of people with a certain type of epilepsy. And like a magic bullet, it stops seizures. But for those people, although ketones have to be present, there isn't some linear relationship. So that it seems to be the same in mental health. It's not like more ketones better. In fact, in epilepsy, if you keep going higher and higher with ketones, then seizures can return. And there isn't a fully established relationship in mental health between higher ketones in a sort of linear fashion and feeling better for all symptoms all the time, right? So if it is ketosis, then it might be partly the ketones, and it might be partly other things that keto diets can do. So we have to be super honest, put it out there that it can help people, and then those who are interested in trying it, support them as best I can. And so whilst they're in that crucial phase of contemplation, which is so precious in human psychology, that I do everything in my power to help them to engage with the interventions that can help their metabolism so that they improve, so that they don't just slip off and go back into pre-contemplation for years and say, keto didn't work for me, it's a load of rubbish. And I think in terms of people that are close to us, sadly, they have to come to that in their own time. I think, in fact, for a lot of people, the more that they get pushed information, the further away they go deeper into pre-contemplation.
Mm,
So it's hard. I think there needs to be a lot of letting go for me,
mm,
because it can be painful to see people who could stand to benefit massively, and they're just not interested.
yeah, that's a brilliant, like a brilliant explanation. I see. I always think I've heard in one of your other interviews you talk about genetic variability, and also you talk about budget when it comes to going on low carb. And I thought in my head I was like, maybe those are two big reasons why people don't change, because maybe you have people in the same household, one's overweight, the other one has anxiety, um, uh, the child has a kind of a learning issue, and they're not connecting the dots that those three issues are, um, the root cause of those three issues are the fact that the carbohydrate or sugar consumption is really high. So then they think that it's nothing to do with food, because these are three completely separate issues. And then the other thing that the hurdle that you come across when you talk about low carb, or when I talk about low carb to friends and family, is the expense of low carb. Um, in comparison to being able to, buy some cheap ultra processed food, the pricing is completely different. Um, so I was thinking that those are probably the two major ones, but then the way you've explained it is, kind of like a psychological background to it, which sounds which makes a hell of a lot of sense. Um, the other question I wanted to ask you is, I know we're coming to the end of the hour, so I'm conscious of your time. But the other question I wanted to ask was, another criticism that I see is that doctors and medical professionals that do not have a direct or immediate link to, say, nutrition, or studying nutrition, tend to get criticized for giving nutritional advice. You often see it with doctors of psychiatry. It's like, this person is a doctor of psychiatry. Why are they giving nutritional advice? It's a completely different discipline. Um, as somebody with a physics background who is now at Oxford researching the nutritional link to ADHD and depression, um, how do you how do you handle that criticism, or how do you look at the fact that people who aren't nutritionists, or that's not their immediate kind of learning, get criticized for giving that advice, yet they are medical professionals or scientists?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think ultimately we're asking individuals to make their own choice about what they put in their mouths, and they themselves don't have nutrition degrees, right? So, so the argument is really around um, an individual's expertise, and whether someone should be allowed to make recommendations. And there's a legal definition around this on making recommendations on food that's different in different jurisdictions. Like, are you legally allowed to say, because of what your symptoms and background is, you should eat this, that, and the other thing? But there's far less legal worry if someone comes to you and says, these are my problems, these are my health goals, and you say, well, people who have been in similar situations to you in the past can sometimes do well by changing their diet in this particular way. That way, it's not giving a piece of medical advice around food. It's saying this is what we know about the science and clinical outcomes that have been reported around food and these symptoms. And that's just a kind of education role, right? And are we really saying that people with, people in a world where most people value free speech, that people can't, find out now for themselves what the literature and sort of clinical world is saying about particular interventions and then just tell people? I mean, to me, it's absurd to say that people shouldn't be doing that. And that, in fact, it's a good idea to open it up because, okay, if someone comes along talking rubbish, then, which they do all the time on all sides, people are talking rubbish. But then they've done it in public, and people will come back if they implement that rubbish information and say publicly, this was absolute rubbish. Then people only sort of have the reputation, and so I think people should be allowed to say what they believe, and in an educational and information giving role. And it's up to individuals to trust whether they believe that. So we have to outsource our thinking. I want an iPhone or an Android phone, but I don't want to have to know how to build it from scratch, right? And innovations come from all parts of society at all times. Like Einstein, although he had a physics degree, he was working in a patent office in Switzerland and came out with 3 papers that changed the world of physics and won a Nobel Prize for one of them, which wasn't even the theory of relativity. It was the photoelectric effect that he won his Nobel Prize for. But if a patent clerk can change physics forever, then I think someone with a reasonable IQ and an interest in researching should be taken seriously. In fact, it's almost the rule that that institutions become stale and to some extent co-opted or corrupted. And that's not to say I don't trust doctors. I think doctors tend to be clever and thoroughly trained and mostly curious and in it for the right reasons. But the way that they're trained can be very slow to change, so very slow to respond to the new information. And you can understand why that happens. It could be dangerous if wrong information starts to be used or recommended. But it means that this pace of change can be glacial and that doctors are afraid of being given into trouble for doing the wrong thing. So there's all sorts of these types of reasons why the individual at the end of the day just has to choose their own gurus. Do you trust the people who are making the iPhones? Do you trust the people who are making the Android phones? And then just go for it and try it, because ultimately it's their responsibility to put stuff in their bodies. And so I think this idea that we can't fall into this sort of no true Scotsman fallacy, where this idea that no true Scotsman would wear underwear under their kilt, right? But that if you find someone from Scotland who's wearing underwear under their kilt, you can say, well, that's not a true Scotsman, right? You can't shift the goalposts like that. You can't just say it's just nutritionists, just dietitians, and just doctors trained in nutrition that we can trust necessarily. You just have to choose your own experts wisely. So that's what I think about that.
Brilliant. Talking about experts, I know we're coming to the hour now, but I'll just quickly throw this in. Could you tell the people listening kind of what MetPsy is?
Yeah, MetPsy is my company, and we coach people to better mental health using the principles of metabolic psychiatry, which is what MetPsy is short for. And it came about because I really felt a moral obligation when I felt better in 2016 to help other people to do what I'd done and to work out why it might have worked for me. So at the moment with the Oxford randomized controlled trial, we're trying to pin down more why it might have worked. And obviously we have to wait and see if it does work in a trial format, but that we are taking lots of measurements that will help us to understand what's going on there. And with MetPsy, it's about applying it. So we coach people who have symptoms like brain fog, mood ups and downs, anxiety, depression, lack of focus, and irritability, and coach them with the best cutting edge information that's out there from my experience, from the coach's experience, from the wider advisor panel that we have, which includes Dr. Georgia Eade, Professor Ben Bickman, Professor Dom D'Agostino, and others, including Adrian Sotomota, Nick Norwitz, and the wider Bazuki research community that we can draw on for information about what's working clinically and in a research setting, and apply all that to support people to make changes that can result in success for their symptoms. And we have a 12-week program where people can apply all these things, learn about them, and get the support that they need through group and one-to-one coaching sessions. And it's really just throwing the kitchen sink at these issues with the best possible knowledge that's out there, and giving people the support that they need. And so big plans for the future, but that's the core offering right now, and we're excited about how well it works.
That's brilliant. As somebody that's, kind of a little bit naive to scientific research, I in the early days of kind of looking into low carb, I always was kind of wondering, was curious as to where funding comes from if you are in effect not reliant on pharmaceutical companies or ultra processed food companies for your funding. Um, how are you, like, what can you tell people about the funding for MetPsy, and, like potentially other researchers out there that are wanting to do similar work, but without going through the usual channels?
Yeah, and you're right. It is hard. There's big public grants that usually have funding calls, so they ask for specific uh, types of research to happen because they've decided through committee that it should be this and that should be researched. So there's the Wellcome Trust, there's the Science and Technology Funding Council, there's the Medical Research Council, and so on in the UK, and then they've got all the other ones in America and beyond. And if the funding call matches, then great, you can go for that public funding. There's been precious little in the way of funding calls for metabolic mental health, right? It's just not really happened much yet. But Bazuki Group have funded a lot, and they're going to continue to fund. So that's certainly an area that researchers can look at. And they have a couple of different ways of doing that. So if people go onto Bazuki Group website, then they can see the different potential ways to get their study funded. I've incorporated crowdfunding into my study, which has been reasonably successful. It's not going to be able to pay for the whole study. Bazuki Group have given money for that, but it's certainly helped. And, Ian Campbell's study in Edinburgh, which he did a pilot study in Edinburgh University, funded by Bazuki Group, and then they rolled the results of that into an application for a Medical Research Council grant, which they got millions of pounds. And so it's growing, and there's going to be more and more of this. And so I would say that it's a great time for researchers to get into this. And it's really vibrant. I think MetPsy is a separate thing, and it's it's a business, and so the funding up till this point has been mainly just through self-funding. So finding clients who want to pay to understand and get the support on metabolic psychiatry principles and to be coached. And at the moment we're looking for more funding to allow us to grow. So that can come from all different types of sources, but basically people who want to invest in this area. So always open to those conversations too.
Brilliant, brilliant. I know there's going to be a lot of people watching this that are going to want to get in touch with you, or look at the stuff that MetPsy is doing. So, the usual end of kind of podcast question that everybody asks is like, how can people get a hold of you? How can people see the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so easiest way is to go to metpsy.com, metpsy.com. If they want to apply to be in the next cohort of the coaching program, that's where to go. I'm on social media at Ali Transforms, that's ALLY Transforms, on X and Instagram particularly. You can follow me on LinkedIn at Ali Houston. Um, MetPsy is on Instagram and X as well. I think on Instagram it's MetPsy and on X it's MetPsy Health. So please, follow along, pitch in with your thoughts. I'm very active on social media, so you can always ask me questions, and I'm happy to respond. So please get involved.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Ali, this has been awesome. Thank you so much. I'm glad we got to do this. I'm gonna hopefully I'm basically snowed under with interviews because I love interviewing people. I love having the conversations, but when it comes to editing, it takes me a long time. And I'm also kind of as I go through the edit, I'm like saving little sound bites for the potential audio podcast. So this may take a couple of weeks, but yeah, I'll be releasing little snippets as I go on socials. So yeah, mate, thank you for your time, and yeah, I hope we get to meet in person properly. I know at the public health collaboration we kind of didn't get to chat, but yeah, I kind of saw you asking questions and grilling the panel, and I like to see that. So yeah, cheers, mate. Thank you for your time.
Oh, you're very welcome. Yeah, and it was great to see you grilling the panel too. And yeah, I'll definitely see you soon.
Nice one. Cheers, pal. Take it easy. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, Effie. My
Nice
pleasure.
one.
Bye.
Cheers, mate.